Well, let's see how this works. I like to process things out loud. And it helps me sort of find a little more clarity in what I intend to do before I do it. And let me put on my little blue glasses here. I'm going to kind of pick up where I left off yesterday, talking about this character in a book that I'm writing. This character, Mud, the name came to me immediately. And I like to trust what I think of as timely impartations of a good idea, something received. You hear about people saying they channel this and they channel that. Well, so too do people who follow Scripture, right? Because that's the small, still voice that tells you the right thing to do, or the right way to think. So Mud was given to me and I didn't mess with it. I thought about how simple it is, and maybe that's a bad thing, but less is more. I thought about, I didn't want this creature to be too obviously derived from. I can't unsee all of the comic characters that I've encountered over the years. And I can't unlike the ones that I always liked. I'm looking at this curtain and I've got a feeling that the wind is going to flip the camera in a minute, so let's keep that from happening. But anyways, a person might rather quickly say, well, there you go. You like your Bernie Wrightson Swamp Thing, your Mike Plug Man Thing, Ben Grimm The Thing, Heap, etc. These sort of arguably earth elemental related comic book characters. But I have to remember that even 60, 70, 80 years ago, these novel comic book characters were quite openly derived from mythology, Superman in particular. Siegel and Schuster were not shy about, kind of the Hebrew Aramaic stories of the judges back in the day and their powers, so long as they remained right-minded. Okay, the most familiar judge was Samson, who really screwed the pooch with all of the things. With great power comes great responsibility, and he didn't figure that out until about 3 minutes before he died. Okay, but he had a real good time along the way. Like that band The Call said, and the walls came down. So anyways, Mud. I acknowledge my influences, of course I do. I'd be an idiot and a loser to pretend that any of my ideas were original, entirely original. It's just not possible. Okay? People's minds were blown when they looked at, that the ladies of Avignon, right, painting that Picasso did. When it was exhibited, they lost their minds over the ugliness of the women. because they were ignorant. And I don't believe Picasso ever said, there's never been anything like this before me. Of course not. Because as soon as somebody went, hey, look at this Etruscan pottery, or hey, look at these masks from various tribes on the African continent, they saw that Picasso was a cover band. They got it. Okay, but people that know their history are not doomed to repeat it. They can choose to repeat it. And that's where either vanity or humility kicks in, when the individual feels that they are personally making a great big difference in the world, without acknowledging the ladders that they've thrown up against the sides of giants in order to get up and ride on their shoulders. It bothered me when I was a music reviewer that I didn't see people giving credit where credit was due, and it delighted me when people did give credit where credit was due. I can look back over the long arc of myself as a creative person and a musician and say that I owe none of it in terms of the songs I wrote and the pieces of music that I created. I owe none of it to anyone in particular, but I will certainly give nods of appreciation to those who helped me get to the place I'm at. Okay? I mean, I'm not afraid to say that for many years I was trying to sound like certain musicians and accomplished, some of what they had done with my hands. I was a cover band. And literally my entire aesthetic direction was idolatry toward a number of heroes that I had. And I've really rethought the concept of hero hugely as I get older. Because the greatest heroes are the ones that give the most and ask for the least and persevere and cope. And wait. And take the next step that seems wise, without choosing an outcome and saying that must happen. Okay? The road less traveled, sometimes you have to hunt to find it. It can disappear while you're on it into the foliage. You really have to pay attention. So I'm drawing a new picture of mud. You can't see it from there, but I will put a zoom up picture of it in a frame in this video. And I was talking to my wife this morning about some things that have occurred to me about mud since yesterday. Because yesterday, while I was riffing behind that vacant church with the water tower that looks like a giant octopus in the sky, mud became clearer to me. Why? Because the chimney on the building that I was sitting beside, I looked at it and I said, that's how tall I want him to be. And I even want some of the color of brick to be in him. And so the location that was very arbitrarily chosen yesterday actually helped me define this creature. Looking at that giant water tower also, that's something that he could lean his back up against, sit on the ground and lean his back up against the uprights and be comfortable, in the way that somebody might lean up against a tree. And I don't know if you're aware of this, let me go grab it, but I found, like I do, the Lord will provide art supplies and also great locations to riff, to journal like this. And I was driving down Bridge Street, and I always look at these piles of stuff that end up by the road when someone's been evicted. you know, we live in this blood red county, and no one hesitates to throw people out on the street. Serves you right, is what most of the churchgoers would say to someone who's up against hard times and can't make rent. Get out. So I pull over and look at these piles of things that have been taken out of houses, and sometimes I find something wonderful that I can bring home. And hopefully you can see some of this, because this is where I had initially, can you see him? This is before I had conceived of this character Mud. I found this huge picture of two trees by a lake. And I started drawing a monster behind the trees, and I intended to have a couple of people camping down here, and they haven't seen it yet. Now this creature is covered with some kind of a furry Fred Flintstone kind of garment. Mud doesn't look like this, but Mud is about that big. In fact, he can be about any size he wants to be, but in this case, by the lake, he's really standing in his full height. And I had drawn a picture, which you've already seen in the last panel of part 2 of the Watertower, of my very first envisioning of this Mud character. And the face, getting back to Picasso and Cubism, of this creature is very, very based on the Korean masks, the wood hand-carved Korean masks that I purchased 30-some years ago overseas, which when they were new, there was the, you know, the convex face shape of the wooden carved masks, and they represented all kinds of things. A new bride, an older married woman, a ghost, a hero, various kinds of demonic things, the shaman and stuff. I have these masks out on the property, just in the garden. But this face of this benevolent elemental creature with, you know, wisdom that spans ages is largely based on the bride mask, where she's always got a kind of a tentative smile and communicates a little bit of uncertainty, but hope. And so that's the face of Mud. He just isn't scary looking, even though he's, you know, some people might have a heart attack when they look at him, but then they would see the face and it would disarm them. They would be reassured by the kindness of the face of this creature Mud. So like I do, because my mind is full of ways to calculate things and try to make decisions based on what seems like sensible math. And I wanted to look at the letters of the word Mud in Aramaic, because I had a feeling that for some reason it was going to help inform me about the character in ways that hadn't occurred to me yet. So the M sound in Aramaic, Hebrew, the early Proto-Hebrew language, the characters which they call oats, each character is an oat, and the entire alphabet is the otiote. Each character has a sound, a variety of meanings, which in a way can be yin-yangy, because there's the likelihood of an opposite thing happening all the time with how these letters are used to make words. They represent something physical. They represent something numeric, and they also have spiritual content. So it's a really cool language. So M-U-D, M-U-D. Now, of course, vowels can be pronounced in various ways. Like mud. Ooh, right? Like you, okay? Or other words. And sometimes vowels can be weird, okay? They can be bizarre, like the letter Y, and sometimes Y. So let's talk about the meaning of mud. The possible meanings of mud. M. The Hebrew letter is mem. It looks like an M. Let me draw that the other way. It looks like an M, but there is a third peak that kind of curves back under a little bit. In the earliest version of it. The kind of things you would find pressed into a bas relief with the flat end of a stick. Okay? Or on a scroll. It kind of now, the mem looks more like a house with smoke coming out of the chimney. But what does it represent? And that house with smoke coming out of the chimney, I suppose, could be some kind of a water vessel or a pitcher too. I don't know. But mem means water, basically. Okay? And its numerical value is 40. Okay? And 40 is an extremely numinous number to me. You know? 40 years wandering the desert. 40 this, 40 that. 40 is all over the place. Now, when used in a word, this particular M sound can connote clearness or clarity, like fresh water, wondering and questioning. Your thoughts flow like water, they don't get dammed up anywhere. And when you think of, the gods of the sea in myth, mem can also relate to mightiness and chaos, like a hurricane, right? Or a flood. So there's the water right in the M. Okay, this creature's made of basically earth and water. Now, for the sound of mud, we look to the letter Vav, okay, which looks like a U with a little foot sticking out of the bottom, right? Like an old-fashioned crutch. And it represents a nail or a tent peg, and its meaning has to do with the securing of something to something else, in the way that a tent peg secures the tent to the ground, or the nails secured a human being to a cross. Jocko, shush. Shh. Shh. There are 3 Vavs on the front of Monster drinks. You can solve that for yourself. What does that drink represent, and who do the people that make it worship? 3 nails on a soft drink. I wouldn't drink it. And I should mention that in ancient Aramaic there were basically no vowels. Okay, but now there are. There are various kind of accent marks and so forth that can be added preceding or after the consonant sounds to indicate the pronunciation. But the U here is definitely a Vav, and that's great. Why? Because this clear, wondering and questioning creature who has mightiness, and I suppose if necessary could exact some serious chaos on people for the right reasons. He's secure, and I would say grounded, okay, to stretch that metaphor a little further. Okay, now we get to the D of mud. Okay, in Hebrew, that would be the word of the letter dalet, which is a door. Okay? And it has a numerical value of 4. Oops, I forgot to look up the Vav numerical value. Give me a second here. There it is, 6. Vav's way up here. Mem's down here. And Dalet is right up there. It kind of looks like a a little bit off-kilter triangle with rounded corners. It's a door. What does it represent when used in creating words? It represents the 4 dimensions, okay? Transitions are difficult, okay? Every transition involves going through either a physical or a metaphysical door. And every choice is a door, right? Yes or no. Will you go through the door or not? Everything is binary. My wife and I were talking about that this morning. Sometimes it just comes down to, will I or won't I continue to do this thing? Should I not do this thing? You know? And as I asked at the end of my video yesterday, don't we all really, truly, in our heart of hearts, know what is the right thing to do? In most circumstances. I think we do. The door represents the 4 dimensions: height, breadth, depth, and duration, right? Time, however you perceive that. And Dalit also represents the passing from physical to spiritual reality, and represents time and depth and how it affects things. So, as a very nearly, at least seemingly eternal being, he's got the time, he's got the depth of memory, he's seen long games come and go, ages and eras. He's made of water, so a flood is only going to disperse him, but he has the ability to coalesce. So this creature could actually go way back to before the days of Noah, or the Great Flood in other cultures. He could be that old. His origins are tough for me. I don't know how I'm going to create an acceptable origin for this creature and keep it real. And one of the things that my wife and I and other people, a few other people, and a whole mess of people who you must go through the internet to find, you're never going to hear them on mainstream media, right? This is definitely not a topic that is a for-profit topic, so the mainstream stays away from it. But there are those who wonder, right? When we look back over the long arc of histories, his story, whoever the victor, the king was, it's his story. And he's going to tell it from his viewpoint, and he's going to leave out things and embarrassments and stuff. This is what anybody who is the chief of a tribe, as it were, okay, or the object of a fan club, for Christ's sakes, they're after, they want to be the top dog. And we know about, from Genesis 6 and from, oh my gosh, all of the Mesopotamian and Sumerian and Phoenician records that remain, that there were beings that came from somewhere else, according to every one of these cultures on every continent. I pay close attention to what the Hopi have had to say over the many centuries. Okay? They seem very, very aligned with truth. And as do Buddhists, who go beyond doing it as an entertainment and who find peace. Okay? I know lots of people who talk Buddhism who are miserable and hateful people. It's not working. Okay? I once said that the people who most remind me of Christians are genuine, dialed-in Buddhists. Not because they're like him, but because they're not like all the rest of people and horrible. Because they found self-control. The hardest fruit of the Holy Spirit to manifest. What if an eternally loving and forgiving Creator who set down some rules and can manifest and physically intervene in a situation that he or she feels is necessary for the greater good, for the novel to continue moving in the direction it was written. This four-dimensional novel called Mankind, okay? Or maybe the history of the universe, which what the ancient scroll of Melchizedek is called by some. What if some of these celestial beings, be they extra-dimensional, extraterrestrial, or however you want to call the thing that you don't know what it is, that's really powerful in some way, were any of these rebellious beings who were cast down and given a certain amount of dominion over this mess we live in, ever forgiven or given a second chance? Or what if unwilling angels were forced to follow by some means that we cannot fathom and found themselves down here and stuck? Okay, we're judged by the company we keep. And being rebellious is a spectrum, right? From I don't wanna to I'm going to kill you and you are my sacrifice, Abel. It's the same triggered no with different degrees of violence attached to it. Starts with the mouth, moves to the fist. If unchecked. So my friend, my character here, Mud, I want to try to continue percolating on the idea of him being here in a way that could be called accidental. Not a choice. Okay? In the same way that if you went out in college with some friends and you were clubbing, dollar pitchers over here, 25-cent drafts over here, and you pass out in the car. And the next morning you wake up in a house you've never been in before, next to someone you've never seen before, and you don't remember how you got there. What if something like that happened to Mud? And he was extended a second chance. But the great challenge of the second chance was that he was going to have to physically endure until the end of the final age and sustain that commitment for a really long time. And he did. And he's literally analogous in many ways to the notion of a guardian angel that sees without being seen, that intends only what is right and good for those whom that guardian angel observes, and that those who are in right relationship in this story with the great creative above will find that this mud provides a hedge of protection, as it were, against the unseen. And its ability to dissemble back into the soil, provided there's moisture, allows him to also be obscured from view and yet present. This is going to be fun. So the name broke out as the right name. The numerics. What's the number for Vav again? 6? 40 plus 6 plus 4 is 50. I don't know what to make of that. Before I found that Vav represents the vowel sound, I thought I would just be dealing with Mem and Dalet. MD, like a doctor, a healer, okay? And but I like how there's that securing tent peg in between the flow and the passing from the physical into the spiritual. Like those two things are anchored right in the middle. Okay? That works for me. Anyways, I'm going to keep drawing my my mud creature here. I've got to get a little more green in him. And I'll share out what I've got so far. I'll take a nice picture of this big painting if I can get a good picture of it. We're at a time of day now when it's hard to find a place where there are not shadows from leaves landing on stuff, which probably wouldn't hurt the picture. Anyways, anybody that's paying attention to this book in progress, thanks for paying attention. And I'm totally interested in anything anybody might have to say about anything that I assert to know, because I don't know everything. I certainly don't know everything about this really important alphabet and language, but I know enough about it, I guess, to be dangerous, as they say. And this is pretty fun. I'm also kind of going back and forth about the possibility of doing the next chapter sort of in the form of Strongfeather's father recalling a scroll or a document or a tablet. I think a tablet would be most appropriate, given that it's about mud, where he was known in a previous age, and that these old ways, in a way, anticipate his appearance now. And, I'm going to have to be very, very careful in... I don't believe that prophecy can be mimicked or parodied without, without getting into a place where you kind of wish you hadn't said it that way. So I'm going to be very, very careful about the story of mud. But what might happen is that there will be one or two stationary pictures in the frame if you were reading it on your laptop or up on a flat screen. couple of illustrations of the creature and the people that are having the discussion with him, with a larger text box that I might be able to make look like a tablet in some way, and talk about mud as the ancients talked about mud. And this would sort of take the place of a big, long, convoluted conversation between the two humans and this creature. It would provide the backstory. And we might, after that, be able to leap forward into the day. I suppose they could be continuing their travels as this information is imparted. It could actually be something that the father relates off the top of his head while they walk toward the Watertower area. And Mud, with his infinite recollection of how things went down since and before and since the dead times, he'll be there in order to kind of like a scholar looking over the shoulder of the grad student, make corrections where necessary. And I don't think there will be too many problems with the father's memory either. So this is getting fun. My foot is firmly on the brake pedal right now as I continue to try to ponder this, but I think that taking these photographs and assembling this message is going to get me to the place where I believe I can create part 3. I hope I don't seem vain in talking about the things I'm making, and I don't feel that I'm important. I don't believe that I've impacted, my art or music has had any impact on human culture at all. I really don't. Largely because such a tiny micro fragment of humanity, a micro fragment of Americans, a micro fragment of North Carolinians and people from Massachusetts and New York, and even a micro fragment of any small town I lived in during that time. Only a wee, tiny, infinitesimal number of people have ever encountered my work, and it was usually because I sent it to them. And so that would mean that the importance of my work is a myth. But it sure was fun and interesting to me, and at times interesting to those with whom I've shared it. But in terms of it having any kind of importance beyond that, it doesn't. I've got a whole wall full of records in there that I've made over the years, none of which is any more important than me giving a can of food to someone who's hungry. None of it. All of it together is not more important than a hungry person in my presence that I can ease their problem. And all of my music and art has not accomplished that. It hasn't even accomplished lifelong friendships with the people I did it with. So I'm neither important nor terribly likable. And I recognize that many of the people in the past whose writings and images and sounds have brought me some joy or have just set me wondering, okay? It took me a very long time to understand that the entire catalog of the group The Residents was kicking the marketplace, the greater marketplace, in the balls in every way possible. And that they were a deeply decent and moral admonition of what they saw around them. I don't know whether that has occurred to a lot of people who say they like the Residents. Most people can only say they like the Residents because the band was so weird. So's hitting yourself in the head with a ball-peen hammer, but it means nothing. They were more than weird. They turned a mirror and pointed it at America and said, this is what everyone sees and says nothing about. We're going to say something about it. And I've seen interviews unmasked of these thinkers and musicians, and they never stop thanking those who've helped them. I try to be that way. The axe forgets, but the tree remembers. I dare say the fertilizer forgets, but the tree remembers too. Mud's not a cover band. Mud is very singular. And mud has the ability to matter.